12 hours. 12 hours I flew across the world to climb into the ground. I'm an experienced caver who maps out systems of tunnels. I'm in Romania right now, burrowing my way through a particularly difficult tunnel. It goes downhill, so I'm slowly letting myself fall while catching myself. I don't need a partner anymore because I map the cave on my phone as I go, and I can tell what holes I can fit through and ones I can't. As I enter into a larger section of the cave, I stand up and shine my light around. It catches on some tribal-like markings surrounding the entirety of the room. I didn't think anyone had made it this far into the cave. It certainly wouldn't have been easy. Upon closer inspection, the markings resemble Hebrew writing. I don't speak it, but I've seen enough documentaries to notice the signs. How old is this cave? I find myself muttering to no one in particular. I edge along the walls of the room, scanning and looking for anything that might jump out at me. As I move along, I find different sets of languages, all the same rough length, almost like translations. I quickly stride across the room, scouring the walls for English, until I see it. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. The inscription found above the gates of hell. This had to be some elaborate prank, an art exhibit lost to time. As quickly as I read the statement, hot air passed by my neck, causing me to turn in a circle scanning the room. I noticed that I had lost my sense of direction while searching for the inscription. I start to panic. I notice and try to control my breathing. This is the downfall of cavers. They panic and make stupid decisions and get themselves stuck. I need to breathe and think before I move. I try to find my way back using the walls and looking for the beginning of the writing, but it feels never-ending. Just a hallway of words, leading me to nowhere. I notice an opening in one of the walls. It occurs to me that most caves have multiple entrances. This kind of opening is known as a corkscrew. It forces me to rotate my body as I pass through it. As I inch through the vent-like cavity, I catch my reflection in a body of water, directly above me. As I lay on my back, dumbfounded by what I see, I soak my surroundings in. No pun intended. A perfectly formed underground lake, completely formed inches from my face. With the small amount of headroom, I rotate my head and see this seemingly suspended accumulation of water spans for hundreds of meters in both directions. Perfectly still, perfectly clear, offering a stunning reflection of myself. Something about the reflection seems off, though. Like a mirror with half a second of delay. Or how your voice doesn't sound like your own in recordings. I continue to study the image above me, when I notice my reflection begin to move, my right arm extending towards the surface of the water. I try to shuffle out towards the direction I came, but find myself stuck. My double's hand approaches the surface of the water, the barrier separating us. I try every caver's method to unstick yourself, when I notice the smile on the face of my duplicate. His hand wraps around my throat, cold and clammy like human flesh that's spent years underground and underwater. With strength unmatched by any human, it pulls me free from the rocks through to water. I feel bones break as I'm forced to pass through the opening towards the water at incredible speed. I'm being dragged through the water, liquid filling my lungs and burning my eyes as I try to cling to anything. But my efforts are futile. Endless expanse is all I see in between my thrashing arms. I black out. When I wake, I find myself in another room. My clothes are astonishingly dry. I lay on the cold ground of the cave and collect my thoughts. As I stumbled to my feet, I noticed another person in the cave with me, facing the wall of the caves. That's when I noticed the inscriptions. I'm back in the room I started. I call out to the other person. As I wait for a response, I notice the similarity in our clothing and our hair. The person appears to be writing, their right arm extended with a black crystal-like stone in their hand, etching words I can't understand onto the wall. I slowly approach them and notice that it really is me. Hello? Who are you? How did you get down here? As I align myself with his line of vision, I notice the one difference between us. This being has no eyes, just sockets. It doesn't seem to notice my presence, but I don't intend to give it the chance. I start running. I feel my feet slipping beneath me on the damp floor of the cave. I scramble towards the other side of the room, illuminated only by my headlight. I round a corner 50 meters from where I started. I don't know what that thing is, or where I am. My phone has a signal for some reason, but no one's picking up. Not even 911. I don't know what to do other than ask for help. Please, send someone to my location and tell them, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. My family's been acting weird since I came home. They're always sitting at the dinner table, staring on into some unknown abyss, unmoving, unspeaking. Hell, they haven't even noticed that I'm home yet. It's been a week. My dad's always holding his newspaper, although it's a week old, and he hasn't turned the page. He won't let me take it out of his awkwardly graying hands. And my mother won't look up from her iPad. Her back is slouched, her neck is bent in such an awkward position, and her mouth is wide open. It's a wonder why she isn't screaming in agony. My brother, Michael, refuses to let go of his fork, despite the fact that the only thing left on his plate is a strange, dried crimson liquid. The same liquid staining all their clothes. Perhaps they all spilt some wine before I came home. How inconsiderate of them to leave none for me. They're all starting to smell quite a bit. Their skin is turning a sickening yellow. A maggot crawled out of the hole in my brother's head the other day. I keep telling them that if they don't shower soon, it's only going to get worse. They refuse to listen, however, and I'm not surprised. They've always been an ignorant bunch. The house was old and needed a lot of repairs, but it was affordable, and I needed somewhere warm to live for the duration of the winter season. I spent the day moving in and getting unpacked, and was ready to crash early that night. I was just drifting off to sleep when I heard a strange noise from somewhere within the room. Kind of like a suctioning sound, like tape being pulled away from a surface. I got up, switched on the lights, and the sound stopped. So I shrugged it off and went back to bed. The next day passed uneventfully, leading to the second night when the same thing happened again. And again it continued as I got up, then went quiet when I turned on the overhead lights. That morning, I searched all over the bedroom, but found nothing that seemed to be the source of the noise. The third night, however, I was prepared. Again, the sound began not long after I went to bed. But this time, I stayed still. I tried to locate the general area it was coming from. After a while, I realized it seemed to be issuing from the closet on the other end of the room, which was divided not by a door, but by a beaded curtain that had been left by the previous owners. The strange sucking sound continued as I silently made my way over and parted the curtain. There, on the other side, I saw nothing, but the sound was louder now, just above my head. A thread of fear began in the base of my spine, slowly lacing its way up the back of my neck as I lifted my head. There was a square, a loose tile in the ceiling, faintly lit by the moonlight through the window behind me. Something was hanging from around its edges. Something that shone flattened silver and dangled, curling from its sides. The sound stopped, and to my utter horror, the last line of tape dropped and fell to the ground before me. The ceiling tile was finally lifted by whatever was waiting on the other side. At first, it revealed only the musty darkness of the unexplored attic. But soon, the thing's mangled face came into view. And by then, it was far too late. There is an urban legend amongst high schoolers that if a student dies during an exam, then everyone gets a perfect grade. When your future is on the line, that kind of urban legend gets a bit more appealing the closer you get to your finals. I had tried to study, but in a post-COVID world, I was basically years behind. I'd gone to makeup classes. I had organized study groups, and I'd sat with close friends until the sun was rising, trying to make heads and tails of what might as well have been written in an alien language, for all the good understanding math did. It just wasn't possible to play catch-up anymore. The generation below me had better luck, but my generation, we were screwed. I wasn't the only one in my class who felt this way either. Across my class, everyone was in the same position as we saw our teachers giving us a half-hearted education. We all wanted success. Everywhere we looked, we were being told that our futures were pointless. So why not try and make it a bit better for us? Thus, the plan. On the day of the final exam, we played a little game of Russian roulette. Not with guns, obviously, but with poison. Poison baked into a single cupcake amongst 30 identical cupcakes that we all would eat just before entering the final. Given the poison we were working with, one of our classmates would be dead within the next 30 minutes, and we would all have received a perfect grade, and we'd all be home early. A noble sacrifice for the future. We all agreed it was worth it. Every cough in the exam hall had us on edge as we pretended to scribble some answers on the paper. But finally, after 17 agonizing minutes, we heard a moan as one of us suddenly collapsed onto his side. He then began to scream in pain. It was a horrible death. Blood streamed from his eyes and ears, and vomit exploded from his mouth. He gargled and drowned on his own fluids in painful seconds as he tried to catch his breath. The amount of blood that left his body, and with such force, splattered the ceiling and rained down. I sat back, trying to hide how content I was, as the teachers panicked and gathered around what had once been a casual acquaintance. And then, to the side of me, a girl collapsed onto her knees and began to scream also. Her eyes and ears were bleeding. She vomited. She drowned in agony, kicking out in both confusion and pain. And no sooner was she done than a few rows behind me, another student collapsed. It went like this for a while as I shot my eyes at the kid who had made the cupcakes. I wanted to understand, but despite my confusion, she looked strangely calm and satisfied. And then I felt my stomach begin to burn. I've lost track of time at this point. There's not much to account for time, except the seasons, and even those begin to blend together after a while. When I was bitten, I thought that was the end. Wow, this really is it. Death is coming. It's no longer some abstract idea. It's real and unavoidable. How I wish I had been correct. I pray that someone will find me and destroy my body, so that I may finally rest and no longer be a dead man stuck in a world amongst the living. When the virus broke out, everyone panicked. My closest friends and I moved out here to the mountains, figuring those things wouldn't be smart enough to make it up 5,000 feet of elevation. How wrong we were. I know now that this virus has no limits, no distance too far, no journey too great. It will control a body as long as it takes to reach its next target. Muscles screaming for rest or mind screaming for escape. It does not matter. The virus pushes on. My body has been clawing at the window above me for years now. The first months were utter hell. I realized I can no longer sleep, yet I grew weary. I could not escape the agony of this unnatural fatigue. Over the years, most of my muscles have rotted away, and the few that remain are so weak that it is easy to push aside the pain. Upon realizing that these creatures still had their minds, I felt awful for all the ones I had destroyed in my efforts to survive. I realize now that those I killed were probably elated to be killed. To be trapped in a body that you cannot control, and that never rests, is utter hell. I would cry tears of glee if anyone ever found me in here. I should have taken the bullet my friends offered me. But no, I was scared of death then. I wanted to live on as long as I could, lock myself in a storage shed and let the end come slowly. I'm not scared anymore, just resentful of my past actions. Sometimes I wonder about my group, about the outside world. Are any of them still alive? There were still over a dozen when I got infected. Did the world find a cure? I honestly don't know which answer is worse. Did they find a cure and everyone but me has their bodies back? They look back on this tragedy as a part of history, while I remain trapped on a mountain where no one knows I exist, forever waiting for a cure that will never come. Or did the world fail? Did the virus succeed in taking over the entire planet? And all that is left are monsters like me, stuck in useless bodies, waiting to die, scouring the earth for more to infect, not knowing it has already won. It was circling the deer blind. Its steps were soft and slow, intentional and almost silent. Almost. It had been doing this for nearly 15 minutes, trying to find any weak point in the structure. The hunter knew the folklore. He knew the foe he was up against, and he knew the rules. Make it to dawn. It doesn't like the sun. If it's making noise, it means you're safe. It's when things go silent that you have to worry. Don't look it in the eyes. Never believe it. There were only 2 ways into the deer blind. The locked door, which required his key to open from the outside, as well as the incredibly small window used to fire his rifle from when hunting. Both were securely fastened from inside. As the minutes passed by, he kept trying to catch a glimpse of it through the slot of the small window, but it always seemed to duck out of view before he could ever lay eyes on it. He knew from the tales that it was smart, that it might even try talking to him in a familiar voice. Anything to get him to come out. But for the next hour until the sun came up, he was staying put. It was so cold. The deer blind barely insulated the frost of the outside snow. How he longed for a warm cup of coffee and to be removed from this situation. He was not the first to be in this predicament, and likely not the last. He smirked, thinking how no one would believe he actually experienced it stalking him. But surely they'd come to understand when a hunter of 15 years never returns to the woods again. There's a good reason. The sun was close to breaking over the horizon. He could see glimmers of light through the cedar slats. He remembered he still had a cigarette left. He fished the lighter out of one pocket and the cigarette from the other, placing it in his mouth. As he lit the flame and brought it close to his mouth, he paused. Silence. Was he sure? Maybe it was just very quiet. He waited. Nothing. His heart began to race. He didn't understand it. It couldn't get in. Everything was secure. Could it have left? Was this one of the tricks it played on its prey? The hunter froze, ice shooting into his veins. His stomach dropped and his heart began to explode in his chest. He slipped his hand back into his pocket where he grabbed the lighter. It only took a moment to confirm his fear. His finger slipped through the key-sized hole at the bottom of his pocket. The hairs on his neck stood on end as he heard the almost silent, sound of the lock opening behind him. A cool breeze crept into the blind, accompanied by the sound of the door hinges slowly opening. He closed his eyes, and the last thing he heard was nothing at all. The thing in the shed writhed like a dying animal. It was smooth, the color of obsidian, and seemed to absorb all light, drawing it into itself rather than reflecting. The old woman found it not long before the winter solstice, when she sought shelter from the cold in places otherwise forgotten. At first, the thing frightened her, but there was nowhere else for her to go. By frozen daylight, she gathered what provisions she managed to find. The relentless hours of dusk, however, were spent at its side. Soon she grew fond of its company, a formless, twitching mass of darkness. Later still, she began speaking to it. One day, it spoke back. At first, it was only chatter, the kind of nonsensical babble usually reserved for young children just beginning to form words. In spite of her initial fears, she leaned in close and was able to make out one word: feed. She felt a twinge of guilt, sorry for it even. The whole time she'd been saving food for herself, but the poor thing must have been just as starved. But could it even eat? Did it even have a mouth? She began offering food to it, but it would never eat in front of her. She would only know it had accepted it when she had left for the day and came back, and the items were gone. Its appetite was voracious, and soon the usual items no longer seemed to satisfy its hunger. "Feed," it said, begging, pleading. The old woman's first mistake was not feeling compassionate for the thing. It was the act of moving into the shed in the first place. For one day, not long after the new year, the shed's owner came back. She hid from him, watching him from the shadows, knowing that she would be in terrible trouble if she was found out. Then, he saw her, was silent for a moment, then began to yell, began to scream. She couldn't imagine why. She was a harmless old lady, taking shelter from the elements. "Please," she said, "I have nowhere else to go." "Feed," the thing chanted, whispered from behind her. "Feed." The man seemed to think about it for a moment, hesitated, drew closer to her in the darkness. He did not yet hear its voice. The mass crept toward him unseen, fastened around his foot, worked its way up his leg. The man started to cry out as it dragged him down, made him part of itself. But the sound was lost as the old lady pulled the door shut behind her. In the harsh winter sun, her eyes shone smooth and flat, the color of obsidian, and seemed to absorb all light, drawing it into herself rather than reflecting.